Hello, I am Daniel Cormack, and this is my final presentation for the 2021 fall semester of CM310, which will be over occupancy classifications. There are 10 different classifications for buildings, but before I get into those, we need to first figure out what occupancy classifications are and how you classify a building. Well, you first have to look at what the building is going to be used for. Is it going to be a hospital, a pizza joint, or just a home for a family? Next, you need to determine the occupant load, or how many people will be able to use the building at a time. Once these have been determined, you'll be able to classify the building. These classifications have very specific requirements tied to them, like the maximum building height, where certain rooms can be located, and what each of these rooms should be used for. As I stated in the previous slide, there are 10 different classifications for buildings. They are assembly, business, educational, factory and industrial, high hazard, institutional, mercantile, residential, storage, and utility and miscellaneous. Each classification can be broken down into smaller categories, so to keep them in order, they are marked with the first letter and then a number. So, for example, the different assembly groups are called Group A1, Group A2, and so on. So where can you find these different classifications at? In the IBC, or International Building Codes, the specifics of each classification can be found in Chapter or Section 3. However, not every building will only have one classification, so for mixed occupancy classifications and codes, these can be found in Chapter or Section 5. In Section 3, the classifications are split up into their own subsections, with assembly being Section 303, business in Section 304, and so on until you get to utility and miscellaneous in Section 312. What might some of these codes for occupancy classifications look like? Well, I have a few examples that show some of what you might find with Section 3 of the IBC. Code 303.1.1, which is a part of the assembly group, states that a building or tenant space used for assembly purposes with an occupant load of less than 50 persons shall be classified as a Group B or business occupancy. Code 306.2, which is a part of the factory and industrial group, establishes the list of what factories are a part of the group F1, which can include factories that manufacture appliances, boats, clothing, furniture, metals, and a lot more. Code 310.5, which is a part of the residential group, establishes the residential group R4, which are assisted living care facilities for an occupant load of 5 to 16 people, excluding the staff. Most of the codes tend to establish the building type to the respected group. However, there are also a lot of exceptions, like the first code I explained, which can tend to make things a little confusing at times. Good examples of occupancy classifications in use are hard to come by, since a lot of the codes just determine the building type to their respective group. So as long as the people using a building are using the rooms within correctly, then there really shouldn't be any problems that occur. A bad example of occupancy classifications in use is the AB Specialty Silicones facility in Waukegan, Illinois, that had an explosion and caught fire on May 3rd of 2019. This was a Group H, or high hazard occupancy facility that manufactured silicone. The facility did not follow Group H occupancy restrictions, which is what led to the explosion and fire. The facility was using a single drum which held about 400 pounds of a silicone hydride containing polysiloxane fluid. This drum exceeded the storage allowances of this material, and so it subsequently found an ignition source, which caused the explosion. These codes, especially for high hazard groups, are put in place so things like this don't happen. Occupancy classifications are definitely necessary. They help put restrictions on the construction of buildings, which can help to save lives. They also regulate hazards so that explosions like the AB Specialty Silicone facility don't happen. They can also help to make buildings more diverse with the mixed occupancy codes. This means that places like malls can have multiple building types within one building, as long as the codes are followed correctly. Occupancy classifications, although necessary, can be very complicated. There are multiple exceptions within the codes that can completely change the group type of a building. If people are not familiar with occupancy classifications and the codes that follow those, it can lead to some big problems. Specifics about the explosion at the silicone facility have not been released as the incident is still under investigation. So it could have been someone who just didn't want to follow the codes to save a little bit of money, or it could have just been someone who didn't even know they were breaking the code. Overall, occupancy classifications are a necessary confusion. Without them, people would just be building buildings however they wanted, which would definitely lead to some major problems. The codes are very detailed, which help to stop these problems before they can even occur. As long as the codes are followed correctly, there should be very little problems.